So again, welcome. Appreciate y'all coming through for tonight's Freedom February conversation, Commodification of Blackness, Pro-Blackness as a brand, as we look at capitalism, co-opting, and what liberation looks like beyond just the aesthetics. I appreciate y'all being here. I'm gonna jump right in because there's plenty of material for us to go through. Tonight, what we hope to accomplish, what we want to be able to happen is for this conversation to move beyond just me talking to you, but really us diving in together, looking at accountability and liberation, and how we can examine Blackness from the lens of culture, language, resistance, and how it becomes packaged and marketed under capitalism. So when we interrogate capitalism and its relationship to Black identity, really looking at how systems profit from Black culture while maintaining anti-Black structures, the differentiation, performance from principle, what is authentic political commitment versus aesthetic alignment, reflecting on our own participation, right? We are consumers. Everyone that's on this call, anyone that sees this video, we're consumers. So how do we consume, promote, or embody pro-Blackness? And are there moments where it really is perpetuating anti-Blackness? We also want to strengthen political clarity. This is Freedom February. It's Black History Month. How are we grounding ourselves in liberation instead of trend cycles, right? And then always building community accountability, moving from the commodification of our identities toward collective responsibility and action. This is a conversation. It's not about shaming individuals. It's about sharpening our analysis, protecting movement integrity, and ensuring our liberation work cannot be reduced to merchandise, hashtags, or aesthetics. Ultimately, we want to be able to ask ourselves, are we building brand equity or are we building power? So the first grounding question really for us to wrestle with is, what images, brands, or aesthetics come to mind when you hear pro-Black? And just think about it for a second, right? If someone said, oh, wow, that business is really pro-Black, or, that really reminds me of what it means to be pro-Black. What does that look like or mean for us? And I'm not asking for us to necessarily drop it in the chat or to answer it out loud, but just think about what images pop up. What brands would you associate with that? And what comes to mind when you hear someone speak about being pro-Black? Because one, it's probably not the same for everybody. Two, the thing we'll dive into is that pro-Blackness part of our resistance and fight for liberation, or is it for profit? And is there any moments when both can actually share that same space? But we've got to start by defining some terms, right? I said commodification a whole bunch of times. I said pro-Blackness a whole bunch of times. So what does that mean when we're looking at it? For commodification, the idea of turning identity, struggle, or culture into a product, something you can consume, something you can buy. That Blackness is an aesthetic instead of a political statement or commitment, and that capitalism has the ability to absorb our resistance. So someone profiting off of Blackness without creating systems of freedom or liberation just weakens the struggle, right? While saying, oh, I'm pro-Black, but really you're just making money. But when we talk about pro-Blackness, right? So we know commodification is somebody made a profit. Pro-Blackness has historical roots. Garveyism, Black Power, Black liberation movements, and originally was about self-determination, political education, economic independence, community defense. Unfortunately, too often now we see it reduced to fashion, social media language, merchandise, and hashtags. We've very much on occasion talked about when folks show up at a protest and they're taking selfies. If you're here for the selfie, like, get going. That's not why we're here, right? So you're pro-Blackness. Oh, I'm here for Black Lives Matter, but you're taking pictures and posting them on social media and not changing how you interact or how you show up in your lived experience and your business or your work. So wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt that very well could have been produced by someone that's anti-Black and not doing the research and understanding where's your dollar going, who's getting the money that you just spent. And we want to think about that. When does visibility become performance? And is it that for some folks, that's all it ever really is? When does representation stop short of transformation? And I do open it up for folks to either drop in the chat, or if you have thoughts about this, when does visibility become performance? When does representation stop short of transformation? And for us here in New York State right now, our legislative session is back in business. And there's a whole bunch of Black leaders representing localities, but are we seeing transformation? So folks can either, raise your hand or drop things in the chat or come on mic if you have thoughts, because you smiling like you got something to say, sir. Please share with the class.
Uh, I'm just saying, like, I'm just listening to what you're saying, and like, I understand your spill. Like, a lot of the things that you're saying is valid. Like, I agree. Um, as far as my comments and to relate to what's been said, listen. I ain't gonna lie, you hit it in the head. At least for me, I haven't really been on the ground like this. I literally just came home. So for me, I'm really just getting my feet wet and what this thing is all about. So for me, like actually being on the ground, I really don't have that experience. For me, I'm more, I got it from more academic perspective or engaging in prison and protests and things of that nature, right? Outside of being on the ground, I haven't really engaged in that. So I'm just taking it in right now. I'm just being a sponge and listening to y'all.
I appreciate that. I can very much say, all of us started in 2020 and there were massive protests. And even before that, I've been organizing for more than half my life now. And there's always been the people that show up to take pictures, the people that say, oh, no, I went to a protest. I'm all about this life. And then they're shopping at Target. And then they've got an Amazon subscription. And then, they're buying from companies that are boycotted because they are, part of the genocide in Gaza. So it's like, are you really here for that or not? And it's the thing that I want us to continue to think about when not just with the idea of pro-Blackness, but with movement work overall and the fight for liberation. Some folks think just saying a thing makes them part of the movement, but they're not willing to sacrifice or give any more of their time, right? And it does bring us to how does this tie in with capitalism, which is, of course, one of my favorite things to talk about. Everyone knows.
All right, so let me ask you a question now. So, good,
Yeah.
based on these questions, right? When you think about when does visibility become performance and when does representation stop short of transformation? When I think about that, I think about symbolic representation, and I think about politics, right? When does tokenism, things like black representatives, mayors, and things of that nature, right? When does that fall into the category that you refer to, or is it other than that?
Well, I think it depends on the person, right? Because there are certain places right now in this country where Black mayors are showing up hard and they're putting their foot down and they're being what others would say is radical because they're speaking out against ICE or because they've invested in community programs and divested from policing because they know the reality. The other thing that it makes me think about is how many places across the country is there an MLK Boulevard or a Malcolm X Boulevard or Martin Luther King Jr. School?
Yeah, or what them boulevards look like, or where those schools are placed, right? A lot of time.
Exactly. Where are they located? And is there any economic investment in those places? No. Like the answer is no. And that's performative. It's
Yeah.
to say, you know, I'm here for Black History Month. I believe in what MLK had to say, and then not actually living the tenets of what those Black leaders had to say, right? MLK very much was about divesting from police brutality and policing overall and militarism and investing in communities and eradicating poverty. We don't see that happening. So I think those are very concrete examples of what it looks like. And there's probably others. So when when any Black elected official votes for funding to go to Israel, you're you're not here for us. Like, it's literally a police state, and there's, a much larger conversation about the long history of Black liberation being directly tied to Palestine, and that we understand how our freedom is connected, given that it is the same systems of oppression that are causing harm to Palestinians, that's causing harm to Black folks right here in this country. So when those types of things happen, I think it's necessary for us to, one, have those conversations and to speak to our friends, our family, our colleagues who may not be aware and think it's not a big deal. And, well, why should we care where that money went, or, what Israel is doing? How does that actually impact us when the state of Israel actually trains police officers in the United States on tactics of how to control people? Go ahead, Shannon.
Well, I think we probably all know that Jesse Jackson died. And talking about Black politicians and is it performative or is it not? I remember, I'm old enough to remember how the press, the mainstream media treated Jesse Jackson. I came up believing that his shit was all performative because that's what they told me. And then I remember them making jokes, I think on SNL or something like that, about how I don't remember. I think it might have even been a Black comedian, which is terrible. Jesse Jackson never did a fucking thing. All he does is show up when something is happening, so it looks like he was a part of it, but he wasn't. And that was the kind of propaganda they were putting out about him pretty much his whole life. And that's, it took me time to unlearn that. To realize I was being lied to realize I was being fed propaganda. It pisses me off.
It is another part of it, that we don't dig into this conversation, but the role that media plays, the role that narrative plays, and all that we do, is something we always have to look at. And who is the messenger, and what is their purpose, and what is their credibility? Why are they telling us the thing that they're telling us, and what are we doing to find out whether or not that is truthful, right? And on any Black leader, there are countless opinions and stories, and very much, especially if they are an influential Black leader that gains attention, there's always this negative trope, because if you can tear down a Black leader, then you tear down Black people. But again, I said we weren't going to get into that today. We are going to talk about capitalism, though, and co-option. And I did not put the other slide up here. Okay, so you get to just hear me say it because I forgot that other part. But the part about this that I hope we really take away is how corporations and businesses use language and images of Blackness and liberation to sell us something without actually giving power to Black folks, without changing their practices, and saying things like, I support Black Lives Matter, but will drop a DEI program that they have, right? So diversity, equity, inclusion is something no longer part of their policies and practices, but they're selling Black History Month t-shirts. So they're profiting from our Blackness. And then I would also even challenge folks to think about the larger corporations take money from inside locally owned small businesses, entrepreneurs that are charging more for the same t-shirt, right? Because their overhead cost is a lot more than a larger corporation. But you get that cheaper t-shirt from, I'm gonna keep using Target, you get a cheaper t-shirt from Target that says Black History Month or Black Queens or all natural hair or whatever it is. And then that money goes to an organization that is anti-Black, that its workers are underpaid, and that the stock rooms and the manual labor is predominantly people of color and they don't have health insurance. And right, so all of those things, you just gave them money to continue that work instead of spending extra to actually buy Black, right? To invest in a business that is locally owned or supported and has decision-making power by Black folks. Because capitalism couldn't possibly eliminate the resistance, but it can market it. It absolutely can market it. So while we're still fighting and screaming in the streets, they're like, all right, cool, but I'm gonna go make $1. I'm gonna go make some money from this. Um, I'm skipping slides, my apologies. And I do want us to think about who benefits financially when pro-Blackness trends. And think about, for those of us that spend any time on social media or hearing about folks who are trendsetters. And there's lots of articles and videos of young white women using Black culture to become internet famous and literally being anti-Black, right? I think about, particularly with hair, cornrows were considered unseemly and not to be worn until a white woman wore them. And that our natural hair is considered a negative unless white folks do it. And then it becomes this commodification of our culture, that folks are spending money with white hairstylists to have Black hairstyles. And our liberation becomes an aesthetic. So, folks walking around with the power fist up or using language that's tied to our fight for liberation as a trend instead of as something to actually fight for freedom and liberation. I do want to check the chat, and I apologize. Things like coconut oil and shea butter that were from our community and our culture. Yes, it was Bo Derek that I was talking about. And whenever if you go on vacation to a predominantly Black island, who will you see on the beach? But those are the things that we're often fighting against and needing to, while at the same time actively fighting for liberation and calling it out for the purposes of saying, listen, you're not really fighting for me, you're just making a profit off of my Blackness. So those are, when we're talking about capitalism and its attempts to neutralize the resistance, really what ends up happening is it profits from it by using its images to make $1. But let's talk about the difference. Oh no, go ahead, Hassan, go ahead.
I was about to say, like, I agree with you, right? But at the same time, I just want, I guess, I'm playing devil advocate here in relation to where's the accountability on our end, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, in a sense, like, granted, I understand that And we live in a capitalist society, right? So we're talking about something that's inevitable to happen, right? Like, for instance, you think about Juneteenth, right? Before, nobody knew about Juneteenth, right? But now it has become a federal holiday. Everybody knows about it. You got Juneteenth T-shirts, you got Juneteenth cards, everything. So it's like, well, like I think for me, it's like, all right, where's the accountability on our end in being guardians, I guess, so to say, of this culture, that resistance culture that you refer to, and do it all at the same time. Do we actually have ownership to claims to these type of things, right? So it's like I wonder, like I did the spill is valid, right? But I think just playing devil's advocate, I just think like some things is inevitable to happen, right? You think of, like I said, the co-optation of our culture, that's not new, right? You think about everything. You do like the swag, how we talk, how we dress, right? You think about the society today, right? You know what I'm saying? Like black people, whatever you would like to consider, like we shape the culture of the society, right? Just like black Brazilians shape the culture of Brazil or whatever the case may be, right? Like so it's like understanding that dynamic, I just think like it's just inevitable to be have some type of commodification transpire. But I think like when do we acquire ownership or to this type of stuff?
Because you just getting ahead to the next slide. That's all. you just you taking us to the next slide where I didn't even have to, I didn't have to say, oh, and accountability, because what is the difference
I feel
between aesthetic pro-blackness and accountability-based liberation? Because it is something that all people, regardless, right, including black folks, because as I'm talking about this idea of, folks going and buying merchandise and saying I'm pro-black, black folks do that. We are not, incapable of perpetuating these same systems because we are, born in it and bombarded with it on a daily basis. So that that is the thing we want to talk about is how do we differentiate between aesthetics and accountability based, right? Uh, so we've already really talked about aesthetic pro-blackness. There's symbols and images and individual branding, and it's a transaction, right? You gave somebody some money, you got a thing. And it's really just about the individual. It's not about collective liberation. It's just I'm pro-black, and here's the t-shirt I'm wearing, or I bought myself an unk from one black owned business, and this is what
Well,
I've got.
a person don't even have to be pro-black. They just supporting the movement, right? Sometimes that just be the fact. Like I might not even be pro-black. It's just that I'm supporting the struggle, right? I'm not protesting. I'm not voting, but I'm black. So I might buy a Malcolm X T-shirt or Black Lives Matter T-shirt just to support the movement, right? So sometimes that be the case.
Right. And the question though is, are you supporting the movement or are you supporting our oppression? Depending on where you got the merch from, right? Where is our dollar going? What does that look like? And there's going to be, I think next week actually is another economic conversation about how we spend money. But accountability based is different, right? This conversation, political education, right? How we're walking into spaces and intentional about what we're learning or unlearning, collectively organizing together. Yeah, we should all wear the same shirts and roll out as a crew. And we're branded as a collective, not as an aesthetic. I mean, we still gonna look fly. Let's be real. We gonna look fly. I love the all of us logo. And we look at resource redistribution. Our community closet is a great example. It's not just like we're taking things in to make a profit. We're taking things in to redistribute to those that are in need. It's fighting for structural change. It's long-term commitment. It's not showing up to one protest and then going home and sitting on your couch and saying, I did a thing, I'm done. It becoming part, it's you becoming it becoming part of your lifestyle. And we talk about that a lot. This isn't a hobby. It needs to be your lifestyle. And that's the difference. And that applies very much to Black folks. If someone says, "Oh, I'm pro-Black," I'm I'm at a space in my life where I go, "How? What are you doing to help us get to liberation? What are you doing to help us to get to freedom?" And I absolutely believe that if we get Black liberation, everybody else is free. Everybody else is free because the chains that bind us, when those are broken, it breaks all other systems and structures. So our freedom literally is necessary for the freedom of everyone else. Whereas the reverse is not true. Other groups have gotten rights and freedoms, and Black folks still be condemned. So we need to be accountable. We absolutely do. And that's how we need to think about it. Is your pro-Blackness consumable or is it disruptive? Are you actually disrupting the systems and structures? Are you educating yourself and others? Are you looking for how your actions or purchases are a part of creating change? Or are you just a consumer? Because then it becomes very clear, right? And I know a number of Black entrepreneurs who are absolutely amazing and wanting to be able to not just personally invest in their community, but invest in their work, because then their dollars come back to us, right? They stay local, because that's the other piece is locally owned businesses, that money stays local. And so that economic investment has a real impact. And it's a whole nother conversation about the Black dollar or just how money in localities transforms what it looks like, because we do need to ask, who are we accountable to? Are we being accountable to ourselves, to our communities, to our people, or are we just being accountable to the dollar and the profits of those who are profiting from us? And we are able to move from critique to construction, right? I can talk all that shit about how people do things wrong. And also, we need to be able to say, and here's how we can do better. Here's how we can actually build things up. Here's what constructing our lives in a way that truly is pro-Black in a liberation kind of way is right there. Again, political education. Study beyond the slogan. Everyone knows what a hashtag is. Do you know where the hashtag came from? What is the meaning behind the hashtag? Why the Me Too movement got co-opted so quickly? It was started by a Black woman, and then all of a sudden, nobody even knew her name. The idea of collective strategy instead of individual platforms, right? Social media has been used to lift up voices and to create awareness around issues that folks didn't know about.
So let me ask
And
you a question.
yeah,
Like, start thinking about this. What about the co-optation of the movement itself? Right? You think about like pro MAGA, right? Individuals, they adopted a lot of things from the movement, right? How they organize, how they, you know what I'm saying, they social gatherings, right? The flipping of the defunding education to the funding of the police, right? They basically took the movement and took it for themselves, right? Do you think about the same thing about the individuals about the anti-Palestinian movement, right? They did the same thing. They basically co-opt the movement, right, against the anti-Palestine and the pro-Israel individuals. They basically established their own movement by taking the lessons that they learned from individuals like the Black Lives Movement, right, and they took it for their own selves to see how it works, right? So it's like even the aspects of the political education, the collective strategy, sacrifice, all of that can be co-opted. Can be co-opted.
so the question for me always is, are we willing to do the work to not be out organized,
Yeah.
right? Because again, this comes up a lot in all of our conversations is, as Black folks, we're divided. As people who believe in freedom and liberation for everyone, we're divided. right? And so that division allows for opposition to just keep winning.
Yeah.
Like yes, they're absolutely using the same tactics and strategies that are known and true that have been part of this country since inception of organizing and strategy. And the reason they're better at it is because they are united. They're absolutely united. That if they disagree with each other, they don't say it publicly. They just like, yep, James, we still gonna make sure we stop them from voting in the next election. And you and I can talk about whatever else later, but we're doing this thing together.
So
They out organize us.
yeah, and I agree, but I think that happens too. Like you said, the division. I did for me as Black people, I just don't believe that we're a monolithic group, right? Like
Absolutely.
this ideal of Black collectivity, right? This imagery of like this, I just don't think it exists, right? So how do we organize knowing that this division exists, right? You know what I'm saying? Knowing that we're not this monolithic group, right? How do you organize in relations to that, right? So I think
It's a hell of a battle to fight back against hundreds of years of conditioning and oppression, to be able to convince a people that the same conversation that I've had with Zionists, I've had to have with Black folks. The thing that you believe isn't true. That you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and as long as you work hard, then you're going to be successful, and it's nobody's fault but you. The systems and structures are not the problem. It's you as an individual. We have to convince our own people that there's something to fight for, that it's worth fighting for, and that it's possible for us to win. Instead of what I come up against most often is that I love myself, I love being Black, but I'm going to mind my business. And I just, as long as I'm okay, I can't risk my job because who's going to take care of me if I lose my job? Well, right, that's the whole point of a collective, is that if we were collectively working together and one of us has needs, then the rest of us step up to support, which is what we do organizationally, but not something that is believed by a community that was built on collectiveness, right? Before we were ripped from the lands and the countries and tribes in Africa, collectiveness was a part of our being.
yeah,
And even when we first were transported over, our survival was dependent on folks who didn't even speak the same languages because they weren't from the same tribes, working collectively together.
yeah.
But over hundreds of years, you're on mute, but over hundreds of years of continuing to divide and continual struggle, that history has been erased. Our public schools do a disservice. They do not teach children about the important history of this country, especially of Black folks and their struggle in working together, and the Black Panther Party working across racial and economic lines, and what that looked like and why it was so dangerous, and that they sacrificed their time and their comfort and their resources. They pooled their resources. Like, Black culture is about community and collective until we were told that capitalism was better.
I agree, but I also think go back to what my Martin Luther King referred to is that I think we have been integrated into a burning house. Right? The reality is that when we was forced into our own communities, right? You know what I'm saying? We had more sense of a collectivity because you had this mixed income community where you had middle class Blacks, poor Blacks, all intermingling with each other, right? So we had this cooperative economics within our communities because we were forced in the same communities, right? Once we was able to get out of these communities, right? This is where the dollar and all this thing began. The vision became, right? It became obvious, right? People. So I think for me, that aspect of that we've definitely been integrated into a burning house. I think that's true because, like I said, when we was integrated, when we was forced into certain spaces, there was a form of collectivity. Once we was able to sit at the table, go to the movie theater, go to this mall, buy this car, go this place, that dollar, or many Black, You think about black flight. We don't always talk about white flight. Let's talk about black flight, about the black middle class who left the black community, the poor blacks, because they had the opportunity now to leave, right? To go to middle class white neighborhoods or the suburbs, whatever the case may be, because they had money, right? And that took out dollars from the poor communities, businesses from the poor communities as well. So I think a lot of that really transpired. The 60s and 70s had a pivotal role in what we see
And
today.
whose message was it though? We have to also recognize, right? Because I agree with you. The implementation of integration intentionally weakened Black communities and Black opportunity because those in power said, okay, if we lost this battle, how do we still win? Like, we're going to give you integration, but we're going to remove all Black teachers because we're not going to have Black teachers for our white students. Like, we're going to have, if white and Black students are going to the same schools, then it can only be white teachers. So Black folks lost jobs, right? So it was integrated for the students, not for the teachers. And that was intentional. And the same thing happened, you already spoke about it, with redlining. And so there continues to be this message and narrative around Blackness and the negativity that Black communities were ghettos because you couldn't get a loan, you couldn't get housing, nobody's giving you money. It was poor and impoverished. And if you made enough money, you don't want to stay living someplace that has no investment. So society told you, don't live with other Black people. Go live where people with money are. And those people with money are
American
not
dream.
Black.
Yeah.
They're not Black, right?
American dream.
So until Blackness became profitable, and then profitable to who, right? Like this whole conversation that we're having around what is pro-Blackness. And it was MLK that talked about the drum major instinct, where folks would buy that fancy Cadillac that they couldn't afford and end up in debt for their image, because the image was more important than their sustainability. Their image was more important than their community and their collective, because it was that individual mindset they had been taught. Get yourself out. Don't worry about who's behind you. And that's what we continue to struggle with, because I do question, if being pro-Black wasn't profitable, would it still be popular? I think history gives us the answer, because pro-Blackness was not always profitable and it was not popular, right? And then when those in power figured out that they could make money off of Blackness, then it was popular.
So let me ask you a question.
Yep.
Let's think about the movement today. Like you think about the movement for Black lives, right? You think about professors and books on, you know what I'm saying, anti-racist books, right? All of these, you have academics who definitely profit off of, right? For instance, the struggle, the movement, right? Through their books, the literature, right? But they're taking the platform. So it's like I don't know how to really phrase it. I'm just thinking of, because I'm thinking about individuals, and this is my guy, so I don't want to put shit on his name. Like I think about Robin D.G. Kelly, individuals like this, right? So it's like that's really my guy. I like Robin D.G. Kelly, but at the same time, I understand that those type of platforms, right? When we think about ideal of racial capitalism, right? The ideal of racial capitalism has been commodified, right? You know what I'm saying? The teachings and the literature around racial capitalism has been commodified, right? So it's like, so I'm just thinking about like you said, the whole pro-Black thing. I understand it, but it's just like as we progress and as we move about, it's like I don't know. It just seems like it's inevitable for somebody to try to profit off the struggle, the profit of the social disparities of, you know what I'm saying, the people in the struggle. So it's like I think that right there is, I don't know. I just don't think we'll ever get around that. So it's like, how do you create a movement knowing that that variable would exist, right?
Mm-hmm. And the thing that I I remind myself very often is that we are fighting against systems and structures that we don't necessarily have replacements for. We know that capitalism is bad. I'm point blank, period. Folks will fight with me, argue with me, and say, oh, well, it's not capitalism, it's how capitalism is implemented. No, capitalism's whole purpose is you have to hurt someone else for you to be profitable,
Right.
period. So it's bad.
Right.
We don't have the language to completely replace it. And that's part of our struggle, right? Because if we're not trading pieces of paper and coins for products and services that we need, then what are we doing? Like what does that look like outside of the current structure that we have? The
Right.
other piece of it, I believe for me, is easier around changing the mindset of individuals in believing that we should operate this way. I I I have conversations with lots of different folks with different levels of experience, knowledge, understanding, political education. Some have never had a conversation. Others read books that I've never even looked at. And being able to have that conversation and talk about, hey, shouldn't everybody be able to, have food and water? And why are there billionaires or trillionaires? And how did they get that money? How could you be a billionaire if there are homeless people and folks living in poverty? Like
Right.
how do we have such a wide range of resources? And shouldn't it be that folks are able to survive? And it takes time to get to the place where you really are able to break down that the CEO of an organization is not making the widget, but has two mansions and a jet. But the people making the widget that's needed for the airplane need social services, right? And that something about it just don't seem right. And then when you dig into the further history of this country and watch that divide grow and grow from how much a worker made versus the supervisor, where the supervisor did make more, but it wasn't 100 times more, 200 times more, 300 times more, while their wage stayed almost the same and the supervisors continues to grow. Like, those conversations create a reality for folks to go, well, shit, that's fucked up. No, it's not okay. And even though we don't have all of the answers of how we get to a space where our likeness and imagery isn't for profit, but it is for liberation, we may not have all of the answers. We know that we should be fighting.
Yeah, I think those same conditions you just spoke to also they have a duality, right? They create collectivity, but they also create division.
Speak on that.
Like when you think about you talk about capitalism, how as some people increase in wealth and other people get poor, right? That struggle of poverty, right? Some people are able to grow, let me say, just get some form of solidarity from that, right? Be in the same struggle, and they'll approach it from that perspective. Some individuals, right? They're like, I'm poor, I ain't got no time to go to protest. I got kids, I got bills to pay. You know what I'm saying? I understand y'all plight because I go through the same shit, but I ain't got no time for that shit. Some people is willing to make time for that. So that's what I'm saying. You got that ideal of this duality of solidarity and division transpiring due to the conditions of poverty, right? So
I
it's like
agree.
um, that's I think that's also a conflict, right? You just understand that's the dynamics of being poor. Like you're gonna have some people that organize under these conditions and fight against these conditions. And you got some people that they may, like I said, sympathize with the struggle, but they're like, yo, I'm not willing to sacrifice my time or what I got going on for that. You know what I'm saying? Like I got kids, you know what I'm saying? Like granted,
Mm-hmm.
I sympathize with y'all, but if I lose my job, y'all ain't nobody gonna pay my bills.
And that's the point, is that fear that is put in those folks is intentional. because the actual circumstance that does come out of collective struggle is community that cares for one another. Black Panther Party showed us very well. They're not the only example, but it's the one that's most recognizable to folks.
Yeah.
Now, we ain't got the resources to make bologna sandwiches for everybody right now, but they did it. They fed folks. They had a school. They had a health clinic without, the quote unquote outside help. So when someone said, I'm not working for Mr. Johnson anymore because, he called me a nigger, but I don't know where I'm going to get my next job. The Black Panther Party walked up and said, all right, we're going to make sure your family's fed while you're looking for work. That is possible. It requires a leap of faith, and it requires political education and understanding. Like, you have to unlearn this idea of, I can't risk my job because I won't be able to feed my family, to I can't risk staying in this situation because it could cost the lives of me and my family. Right? Like, it's that mindset and that view of, I'm staying here to protect my family, but am I protecting my family? And a quick story, because some folks know my children are not happy with how much time I spend away, and they much rather me home. And I say, I fight so that you can succeed. That I'm not willing to live with the current systems and structures that are barriers to their success, barriers to their knowledge, and that I have no choice but to fight. Even though I have been blacklisted from jobs, I absolutely got fired from work. So when people are like, what am I going to do when I get fired? Well, what I did was start my own organization, but I'm just saying, like, not everybody can do that. And there are those of us that are already here, ready to offer support, to say, oh, this happened to you, right? Okay, so come to the next crew open hours and tell us what your crisis is, and we'll connect you to the community and services that will provide and protect you. And the more of us that do that, we create a larger network that defies capitalism, that we become self-sustaining, right? Because what would it look like if we actually had a community garden inside every impoverished neighborhood? And people could do that, right? When my family was sharecroppers, they were trading. It wasn't a dollar. It was product. It was, this is what I have and what do you have, and I got chickens and you got broccoli or whatever the hell it is, right? And it was a community that took care of each other. But instead of community, we have commodification. And I think we need to recognize what that means and help to convince folks that it is possible to stand up for yourself, and that if you lose your job, there is a community to protect and keep you. But that is the hardest thing for folks to believe when they are too poor, too sick, too tired to fight capitalism. Thank you, Shannon, for dropping that in the chat. But also, I don't plan on working until I die. Right? Even though the work that I do, the work that I am fortunate to my purpose fulfilled with this organization and the work that I do is amazing. I don't want to work until I die. I do want to be able to sit on the porch in a rocking chair yelling at kids, y'all better get over to the Freedom School. I ain't playing with you. Get on. I remember when I was young, I want to be that person. I want to be that person. Well, I still can. I want to go someplace where nobody knows me and sit on a beach, right? And everyone should have the opportunity to do that and not work until they die. But we can't do that if we don't have these conversations. We can't do that if we don't fight back against the narrative and the dominance in this country that tells us you should dream of your job. What is your dream job? And I saw online it said, I don't dream of work. Right? And here we are thinking about what are the ways that folks profit from Blackness without Blackness profiting and being moved towards liberation. Because like that last question that said, if pro-Blackness wasn't profitable, would it be, something folks cared about? History tells us no. Right. So I do want us to be able to have one thing that we're rethinking after this conversation. You don't have to share it. I just want you to internally, if you want to drop anything in the chat, you're happy to, or if you want to come on mic. But I want you to think about, as we're going through this conversation of the commodification of Blackness, about how capitalism shows up, how co-opting the culture of Blackness profits anti-Blackness, and what authentic liberation looks like or should look like. What is it that gave you either pause or gave you a deeper or new understanding, or made you want to read something else, or to dig in, right? Because these conversations are not about us having all of the solutions. It is about opening the door to the conversation and us continuing to move forward to ensure that we are fighting for liberation, that it is about us building power, not just brand equity.
Yeah. For myself, to basically what I took from this whole spill, right? In relation to this. All right. For myself, I think the biggest question is to myself. What am I doing? Right? I understand to be involved, I am the work. Right? I gotta do the work for myself in order to be out there. Right. And I wonder if I say I'm an individual who is pro-black, right? What does that pro-blackness look like? What type of work? What does that work look like, right? I'm saying in my everyday life, like you said, if I'm something that I live, what does that look like in my everyday being, right? And for myself, I really gotta sit with myself and really critique that. 'Cause like I said, one thing, the reason I'm here, and the reason I was at the little gathering, like I told Sean, like YG, like I came out here to trying to find my place out here and try to get involved. What that looks like, I don't know. I'm here trying to get my feet wet, trying to jump in the water, so to say, right? And I just think, based off of the spill that was given today, I just think for me, it's about understanding me. What is the work that I'm doing, and is that work that I'm doing? Am I contributing to the commodification of my culture, or am I actually, you know what I'm saying, contributing to the resistance, right?
That's dope. And I appreciate what Shannon dropped in the chat. Want to really spend the time to find out how to completely divest from anti-Black and anti-people of color. Financial shit is intimidating. It's a lot. And we've talked about this with boycotts and the BDS movement, that we recognize not everyone can just stop shopping at Walmart, right? Because Walmart's cheap. And if you're poor, you need cheap stuff. Like that's just, it is what it is. What we can do is make adjustments, right? So maybe it's that you make the extra effort to buy certain things someplace else. So you don't spend all of your money at Walmart, or you don't go to Target, right? Like you do the work to find alternatives. So if there's like, for instance, for myself, there's a particular pair of pants that I got from Target. And I love these pants. They are the most comfortable. They're some of my favorite pants. You can tell by how much I'm talking about them. And I've been searching for how I can get these pants again without going to Target. And I haven't found them yet. And so I don't have these pants. And I'm sad, but I'm not going to Target. Like, okay, I'm just gonna have to get some other pants. But I did the work. Like I Googled. We literally walk around with computers in our pocket. You can type in the label of your clothing and find out where else you could get them. Or you can look for, and they do exist, and I will absolutely share to the best of my abilities, Black-owned businesses that sell really fly stuff. Some folks are not going to be surprised that I'm going to shout out Fresh and Fly. That's in Albany. Angelo Justice Maddox, local entrepreneur, has clothing. You need some new clothes, Black owned, local investment. Boom, there you go. Maybe you're going to have a new style. I don't know. The point being that the convenience that we lean on becomes the barrier to our liberation. I don't have time to Google to find out where I get these pants. We are all busy. And I truly believe that capitalism intentionally tries to use every second of our day so that we don't have time for anything else, right? If you have to take a bus to your job, wherever your job is, that travel time is atrocious. Been there, done that. And then you get to your job and you're there from 9 to 5, and then you're not back home until maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. And you've got to feed your kids, and you're making them food, and you're cleaning the house. And I'm supposed to figure out where I'm shopping instead of Walmart? Yes. And also know how to lean on your community and get that information from somebody else. Because you ain't got the time, but you probably know somebody that already figured it out. Because we're amazing and we do that shit. So for me, I talk about this. I always rethink, is there something I could have said differently? How can we get this information to more people? How can we make it more digestible or attractive or sexy? What does branding look like for people who want to have conversations about political education, right? I'm not against tricking folks into the room. I just got to get you in the room. And then let's have this conversation and be really honest about where we're at and what our expectations are. And are we fighting to have better lives, or are we content with the struggle because we don't want to risk having less? Back to the chat. Make sure reverse engineer those pants. Man, Shannon, I wish. Sharon, I've been sitting with how I am constructing my life, what type of paid employment I am going to take on, as well as how I spend my unpaid time, which is for real a struggle, right? But literally the intentionality, and that's one of the things I want everyone to take away, is it's about the intentionality to do a thing. It doesn't mean that you have it all figured out in like one meeting or in 1 week or hell, 6 months. But if you're willing to take even a few minutes to think about it, to consider it, to have a conversation like we've had today, then we all get a little bit closer. And I want to lift up, I appreciate that Shannon stopped when she saw people of color interacting with police. What up? Yes! Appreciate that because we have had a lot of conversations about what it means to be a disruptor, what it means to be a witness, what it means to be an accomplice, not just an ally, right? An ally is going to buy a shirt from a Black-owned business. And I appreciate that. An accomplice is going to stop on the side of the road and videotape and say, hey, are you safe? Do you want me to call somebody, right? So us moving in that progression from having conversations to moving to action is always part of the goal that I want us to always have. including in predominantly white spaces, right? So that's awesome. I appreciate that. And we are going to be closing it out soon, but with before we do, I'm just trying to find my notes. I do want to ask folks if they are interested in, and I know most of y'all, in further conversations beyond just Black History Month, right? So these political education conversations that happen during Black History Month, the theme this year being about freedom, is it something that you're interested in participating in beyond February? Got some head nods.
Why not? I'm saying like the movement on it ain't just predicated on February, right? Granted, we understand like as Black people, you got February, you got Black August, you got these Juneteenth, you have these events, right, where we give highlight certain things, part of our culture. But the reality is, this shit is 24/7, right? Like 365. So I think definitely have it outside of February. I think February just, I guess, it's a month where it's just heightened, right? It's heightened because it's federally recognized, so to say, right? And everybody knows about February and Black History Month, so it's good to articulate people that don't know about Black history to bring them to the discussion about Black history for February. But outside of that, I think if it's the struggle is constant, right? It doesn't know it ain't a month, it's just a month. So
I appreciate that. Thank you. And other folks had dropped in the chat. Absolutely. I would see more like this that also nourishes, literally and figuratively. Yeah, we usually have food. um, I Someone asked in the chat if we can provide childcare. So one of the things that I do attempt to remind folks is that our spaces are family friendly. So we don't necessarily have childcare. You know, if we grow our network, we could, but we are family inclusive. You can bring Anybody can bring their kids anytime. They'll probably end up with Roman in my office, right? Like it's the de facto childcare room is Roman's on his computer watching something, and all the little kids are watching it with him. That's what happens. So it is always family friendly. We try to encourage folks, and it also is another barrier. Some folks, I've had feedback, don't want to bring their children because they feel it's a distraction, right? They're not able to focus, or maybe they just want some time out of the house without their kids. I ain't mad at them. I fully understand. And also not knowing if they're new to all of us and haven't been in space with us before, not being aware that if your child has ADHD, I don't care. If your child screams and interrupts in the middle of the meeting, I don't care. It was probably Roman first. That, we don't judge. And that is difficult for people who have been told their children need to be quiet, or that children are disruptive and that children are to be seen and not heard, and like all of those things. So families are always welcome to be here in any of the space that we have. All of our meetings now are hybrid, any of our community conversations. So next Tuesday, I will be here in the office if anybody wants to show up, but it still will also be virtual. We do hybrid every single time because it is about accessibility. So if folks have children and just want to be home, okay, I don't care if your kid runs across, in their pajamas. Like that is a you problem. But um, I'm glad that Roman doesn't, walk up with his shirt off anymore. I appreciate that. It was a lot. But yeah, this is always supposed to be a space where anyone can come. And if we had a grandma army, then yes, right? But it's about us building it. It requires us being intentional, just like with anything else, that we have to build it. I'm not just going to be like, oh, me and Shannon said that Shannon's going to be the babysitter. Nah, that's not, we ain't doing that. Sorry, Shannon. I didn't mean to say that about you specifically. But what we said for Freedom February is that, this isn't just about a month of Black history. It's about love, resistance, and collective liberation. And it is a month-long political education, community engagement, and action series grounded in Black history, Black love, collective liberation that kicks off the rest of the year. That it continues, that it doesn't just stay in February, that we find the moments and what can grow from this. Who has an idea or a thought that then becomes the next possible thing that creates a different pathway to our collective liberation. That's the work that we do. We want to be able to educate ourselves and educate each other. And we also want to look for those moments where we spark a thought or an idea that gets us closer to freedom. So I do appreciate that y'all joined us. This recording will be shared on our YouTube page so that others can listen and hear what we discussed and the information that was shared, and hopefully be on their own journey towards collective freedom and liberation that is not centered in capitalism and that does not commodify Blackness, because we ain't trying to have that. So I do appreciate that y'all were here today, and I'm going to stop the recording.
Appreciate you, beloved. You know what I'm saying? No, appreciate you.
Thank you.
Appreciate y'all ladies. I really just want to tap in